Hello. Today I am going to answer another member's question. It will also form part of our new Wars of the Roses series, and indeed it will be very much another case of only connect, as the question forced me to think actually completely afresh. So let's have the question first. It's from Amanda Payne, and it's as follows. Dear Dr. Starkey, my question reaches back rather far in time to Henry IV. We were talking about him in that other Wars of the Roses video. In my book of royal portraits, this is Amanda speaking of course, he is depicted in distinctly un-Western looking garb. The headdress in particular seems peculiar for a monarch of the time and place. It has, she says, to my eye, something of a Turkish air. Remember that word, Turkish. Could you explain its significance? Why isn't he wearing a crown like everyone else? And, okay, I'll recite the little pat on the back. Thank you very much for all your wonderful work and for any light you can shine. Happy New Year. And Amanda, Happy New Year too, and happier still for having made me, as I said, connect and rethink. Now, the portrait I know very well, or I know one version of it. One of the many things that I do is to act, and I'd better declare an interest, I act as historical advisor to Hever Castle. And my proudest achievement there so far is to rehang the wonderful long gallery. We now know almost certainly that it's actually not the work of the Boleyns, but of the period when, after the fall of the House of Boleyn, the house is held by Anne of Cleves, you know, Henry's wife, the fourth wife, who actually becomes, after her enforced divorce, is declared to be Henry's sister and is lavishly endowed with property, and one of the most important of her properties, indeed the one that seems to have become effectively her principal home, was Hever, and she constructs the extraordinary long gallery which still survives there. And what we've done, we've rehung it as the long gallery would have been in the Tudor period. We've used the details that we have from the evidence of Henry VIII's probate's the wrong word, deathbed inventory, post-mortem, let's give the right word, post-mortem inventory, which shows that the pictures in the long galleries at Hampton Court and at Whitehall and at St James's were hung with curtains. Curtains, they knew all about the problems of daylight affecting delicate things like pictures. Also, of course, they were decorative features, and at Hever it's both. Again, it's decorative, it's also protective, and finally it actually works to give rhythm. The portraits, which are a portrait sequence showing the accession of the House of Tudor right up to the marriage with Anne Boleyn, which explains that process. But the pictures, of course, are of very different sizes. The curtains give a degree of rhythm. So that's along the long inner wall, which again the long gallery is perfect for hanging pictures, which is why it gives the name to picture galleries. The window wall, on the other hand, clearly with massive windows in it, but also some wall space. On one end of the wall space, we've hung a sequence of the royal portraits, beginning with the portrait of Henry IV that Amanda describes. These are not very serious portraits. They are a standard type of the late 16th, early 17th century. By this point, every gentleman, to show his loyalty to the crown, wanted a sequence of royal portraits. So, you know, jobbing painters, who, to be blunt, are often little better than sign painters, were churning these things out. But they were probably using somewhere an earlier original, now very often, usually in fact, disappeared, that's vanished. Very little survives before very little of portraiture actually survives before the late 15th century. And as Amanda says, the portrait of Henry IV is very extraordinary. It has this sort of upright, almost large fez-like thing draped with cloth. And it was the word I looked at it and thought, this is very odd, this is merely fanciful, but it is Amanda's use of the word Turkish, which for the first time, triggered in my mind, what is the explanation for this? It is, of course, he goes to the Turkish Empire. He goes to the Ottoman Empire because this is Henry before he becomes king. This is Henry when he's Earl of Derby, Duke of Hereford, whatever, the multitude of titles that he had carved out of the vast holdings of the House of Lancaster. This is Henry under Richard II, when he goes in and out of favour, that extraordinary yo-yo relationship. The two men, of course, are first cousins. That extraordinary yo-yo relationship between the two of them. And in the early 1390s, Henry is a crusader. Hence the Turkish gear. But it goes back further than that. Henry's first crusades were not to the Holy Land, were not to the Eastern Mediterranean. Instead, they were to Eastern Europe. They were, in fact, to Lithuania in the early 1390s, 1390, 92. And what he's doing there, he is joining the Teutonic Knights. What becomes the Kingdom of Prussia had begun as a crusading order, crusading against the heathen Slavs. And Henry twice joins in their campaigns against Vilnius, the capital of Lithuania, the Grand Duchy of Lithuania. And again, after neither of the campaigns actually succeeds in capturing Vilnius, and then Henry, although they cost enormous amounts of money, Henry, which the very ample resources of the Duchy of Lancaster could supply, and then at the end of that, in 1392 to 1393, he goes off on an actual pilgrimage to the Holy Land, which at that point is under the dominion, as it would be for many hundreds of years, is under the dominion of the Ottoman Turks. Remember, the Turks haven't yet completed the conquest of the old Byzantine Empire. That won't happen until the fall of Byzantium itself, of Constantinople in 1453, but they control most of the rest of the Eastern Empire, including, of course, Jerusalem. And Henry goes there in 1392, 1393, and rather surprisingly comes back. I mean, very often the pilgrimage, extraordinarily risky, the risk of disease, the risk of shipwreck, the risk of capture, and so on. People did not come back from it. Henry does. He is a notable, highly courageous, highly organised, and of course, very, very rich warrior. But this religious activity is serious. So this, anyway, going back, Amanda, to your point, it was the word Turkish that made me, your use of the word Turkish, your correct observation of the Oriental form, or the Middle Eastern form of the headgear, which triggered this association of ideas in my mind, showing once again the extraordinarily creative impact that the kind of broad discourses that we are having, cutting across time and place, forcing one to think about different kinds of history, the history of portraiture, the history of royalty, the history of religion, and so on. That last is key with Henry. Henry Bolingbroke is the most holy of usurpers. Henry, it's rather strikingly like Richard III, isn't it? Richard III, Richard Duke of Gloucester, another man highly self-conscious about his morality and his religiosity, who does the ultimate treason, the treason of usurpation, and in Richard's case, the actual murder of his nephews. Henry IV only murders his cousin, Richard II. But with Henry IV, there is this passionate orthodox, I emphasise the word, orthodox Catholic religiosity and intense faith, as indeed there would be in his son Henry V. And this was a generational thing. Henry IV's father, John of Gaunt, in sharp contrast, Richard II at points in his reign, in sharp contrast, these were men who viewed benignly, if were not more actively involved, in the great English heresy of the late 14th century, the heresy of Lollardy, centering on the figure of the Oxford philosopher John Wycliffe. And Wycliffe is able to survive because of noble patronage in the City of London, patronage in the merchant community. Against that, Henry IV, Henry Bolingbroke, sets his face absolutely, and the usurpation of 1399 therefore entails not simply a political revolution, it also entails, it's very important we remember this, it entails a religious revolution as well. Once again, there's an intensely personal side, not simply Henry IV's own personal religiosity, but his political association with the other key figure of the fall of Richard, Richard II, the other key figure of the fall of Richard, and the shaping of both the detail, the theory, the practice of the revolution, because that's what it was, the revolution of 1399. That is the Lord Chancellor, Archbishop Arundel, from the great noble family, and very much associated with the noble plotting against Richard. And Arundel, exactly like Henry IV himself, is passionately Orthodox Catholic and profoundly hostile to Lollardy. And with a king like Henry IV in place now, the Catholic Church can and does move. The Roman Catholic Church, the Catholic Church, moves to suppress vigorously, and probably more vigorously at this point than in any other country, heresy. There are two key elements to this. The first is the Act De Heretico Comburendo, for the burning of heretics. The act passed by the Parliament of 1401, that's 2 years after the usurpation of 1399, which prescribes the punishment of burning by the secular arm, by the lay authorities. So the church tries the heretic and then hands the heretic over to the state, and the writ De Heretico Comburendo is issued, which orders the sheriff or whoever else it be responsible then to burn the unfortunate heretic alive. And of course in England the penalty is unspeakable because of the climate. In Spain you're apt to go up fairly quickly. In England you slow barbecue to death very often. It is the most horrible thing. So that's 1401. That is as it were the king moving what is one arm of the pincer, if you like, the red-hot pincer, which is applied to Lollardy, but the other is Archbishop Arundel himself. 6 years later, in 1407, he issues the so-called Constitutions of Oxford, and what these amount to is the intellectual attack on Lollardy, the declaration that an English translation of the Bible and every other one of the actual tenets of the Lollards is heretical, is to be punished, is to be suppressed, and it sets up an entire machinery for the censorship of opinion and the censorship of learning, especially focused on the University of Oxford, and it is terrifyingly successful. Oxford, 14th century Oxford, was one of the great centres of intellectual creativity, focusing on Wycliffe, the philosopher, theologian Wycliffe himself. 15th century Oxford, under the impact of the constitutions, goes into a deep intellectual sleep, as does England in general. Freedom of thought can be suppressed. It can be suppressed, in the case of the Constitutions of Oxford, in the name of religious purity and in the name of necessary conformity and virtue. Does it remind you of what is going on in our universities at present? Woke is, after all, a form of perverted Christianity, a form of perverted religion, and it too resorts to shut down, to silencing, to censorship, and the results will be exactly the same as the Constitutions of Oxford, the killing of freedom of thought. We managed to recover in the 15th century, though it took us getting on for 100 years. So, all from a Turkish headdress. Isn't it extraordinary how ideas bounce, a bit like a ball, a bit like a pebble thrown across the surface of water? Equally fascinating, equally, fundamentally, isn't it, fun? It's pleasurable. Ideas are are enjoyable. Thank you, Amanda. Hello, and thank you for watching David Starkey Talks. If, as I very much hope, you're enjoying them, why not become more actively involved and join my members club? As a member, you'll be able to take part in the members-only weekly question and answer session, suggest topics for forthcoming videos, and have priority booking for my forthcoming live events. And while you're at it, why not have a look at the store page on my website, davidstarkey.com. There you can purchase t-shirts and other merchandise, buy signed copies of my books, and, if you're feeling brave and a bit flush, even arrange to take me out to lunch. Thank you once again for watching. I look forward to hearing from you and to welcoming you to my members club.